Hey everyone, welcome to the Buildings and Carbon session at the Smart Buildings Exchange. I am Matthew Combe. I'm the Executive Director of the Seattle 2030 District, and I am going to be your moderator today. A little bit of information about the 2030 District. We are a private-public partnership that works to break down market barriers to building efficiency. And we are working towards a goal of 50% reduction in energy, water, and transportation emissions by the year 2030. And I'm particularly excited about this session and just the conference in general. Back in 2014, we started working on smart buildings. So it's great to see the progression of where things are today and where we're going with this conference. And then tying that link into buildings and carbon is really important too. So we have some great panelists here for you today. I'm not going to introduce everyone because I'm really not a fan of when someone just kind of gives a bio and reads it off the paper. So I'm just going to let them do that themselves. So if you want to just give your name, a little bit about yourself and the company that you're with, that would be great. And Anita, I'm going to start with you.
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel today. It's really an honor to be with this group of folks. So my name's Anita Jirigay. I'm the Director of Sustainable Real Estate with Unico Properties. We're a private equity real estate investor, operator, developer, have assets in growth markets around the country. So Seattle, Portland, Denver, Austin, Salt Lake City, and then even Nashville now. So our portfolio is about 17 million square feet. And I lead our sustainability department. We're really focused on improving our portfolio's carbon footprints and water savings and so forth. And my background's in building science, and being with Unico gives me that lens into the real estate world. So happy to be here.
Thanks, Anita. Julia, how about you?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for having me. Honored to be here. My name is Julia Raish, and I'm the Global Program Lead for Sustainable Buildings at Amazon. I work in our Worldwide Sustainability Organization, which is a centralized strategy and governance organization that sets company-wide goals, tracks against those goals, and provides various guidance to our business teams. So I mentioned that because I want to be honest that the hard work is being done in the building space inside Amazon's various business teams. So I'm here to represent the big picture and what we're doing, but also as a representative of all of the great boots on the ground across Amazon that are implementing and making progress against our goals.
Thanks, Julia. And Reid.
Yeah, Reid Powell. I work at McDonnell Miller Facility Solutions. I'm an operations manager and specifically in the Smart Buildings Services team. I've been here for about 6 years, and I specifically started an internship because the leadership at McDonnell Miller did a great job at structuring a business unit all around optimization for buildings, and that hit a passion point for me. Buildings and carbon is something that's been present for me for a really long time. Specifically, day to day, I have the distinct honor of getting to support a team of IT specialists, systems integrators, and HVAC experts when it comes to data analysis and making sure people, process, and technology is lined up for them to be successful for our clients with smart buildings.
Thanks, Reid. And Stacy.
Sure. Thanks for having me today. I'm excited to be part of this panel. So my name is Stacy Smedley. I currently wear 2 figurative hats and 1 literal one as the Director of Sustainability at Skanska USA Building, where I've been for 8.5 years now, focused on reducing environmental impacts of construction. Before that, I was on the architecture side trying to design green buildings. And my other figurative hat right now is the Executive Director of Building Transparency, which is a Washington State nonprofit that is managing and scaling the Embodied Carbon and Construction Calculator tool, as well as other free and open access tools and data around reducing embodied carbon.
Thanks, Stacy. So I have a handful of questions for all of the panelists, but you'll notice in the chat, I think we said be sure to ask some questions from the audience as well. We'll try and get to as many of those as possible at the end, and we'll be keeping an eye on it throughout. So be sure to throw them in as we go. Stacy, I'm going to start with you. I think when we first started talking about this session with the Smart Building Center, it became really apparent to me that we needed to bring embodied carbon into this conversation when we're talking about buildings and carbon. Can you talk a little bit about why embodied carbon is starting to become such a large part of the conversation now?
Sure, that's a big question, but I think I'll try to distill it down to just a couple of points. First of all, for anyone that needs just a primer on embodied carbon, it's the carbon emissions associated with everything up to the point when we turn on the lights in a building, as well as how we replace and then recycle materials. So the emissions associated with extraction, manufacturing, transportation, installation, replacement, and disposal of the materials that we build with. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about embodied carbon. It has come, I think, to the table in the past handful of years to the larger industry based on us thinking about decarbonization more holistically, where we're looking at operational energy consumption and decarbonizing the energy grid for our operational energy of buildings. But also we have to decarbonize industry. And a lot of those major industrial players, things like cement and steel and aluminum and glass, are all things that we build with. So we've started to dig into that data, and we're learning now that, especially in places where we've been making progress on operational energy decarbonization through efficiency and then energy grid efficiency and renewables, that embodied carbon piece of the pie actually starts to be larger than the operational energy consumption component. So in places like Seattle, where we have a clean hydroelectric grid and a very progressive code, the embodied carbon emissions of how we built the building can be upwards of 80 to 90% of the overall emissions of the building over a 30 to 50 year life cycle, depending on the building type. So it's a big component of what we're talking about to get to zero. It's a big component of something we have to address really quickly based on the new reports that are coming out around climate change and how fast it's occurring. And now we just have to catch up. We've had a lot of time to think about operational energy, and now the industry is trying to, I think, urgently get up to speed and tackle embodied carbon on a much shorter timeline.
Yeah, thanks, Stacy. I think it's definitely been on our radar as the 2030 district. I think some of our members have asked us for a number of years about the importance of it and whether we're going to do something about it. I think it's become such a large part of the conversation. I don't know if we need to get into it now, and the work that you're doing is certainly pushing that forward. So that's great to hear. Julia, so I think most people are probably aware that Amazon just announced their recently announced their big climate pledge. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and kind of the progress that you've made so far?
Yeah, absolutely. So Amazon co-founded the Climate Pledge with Global Optimism in 2019. We're just coming up just shy of 2 years of the Climate Pledge being announced. If you're not familiar with Global Optimism, it's an organization that's led by Cristina Figueres, who's been one of the chief architects of major global climate treaties. So not Amazon's Climate Pledge, but it's a shared commitment co-founded to inspire and instill change industry-wide. So the Climate Pledge commits Amazon and all of Climate Pledge signatories to be zero carbon in global operations by 2040, 10 years ahead of the Paris Agreement, which is really exciting. The Climate Pledge maintains 3 core commitments. It's fairly straightforward. First is we want to measure and report greenhouse gas emissions on a regular basis. So a lot of companies do that through annual company-wide carbon footprints. Some are doing it on a more regular basis, quarterly, monthly. The second core commitment is to implement decarbonization strategies in line with the Paris Agreement, and that's done through real business change and innovation. And the third commitment is to then, only after all of those decarbonization activities occur and may be exhausted, is leveraging nature-based, socially beneficial carbon offsets to address any residual emissions. So again, just under 2 years of the public launch of the Climate Pledge, there are 115 public signatories. This is amazing to see that much movement in the broader industry and across the globe for all sorts of industry sectors and companies to join in and commit to these 3 same core commitments. And we really see these as the companies that are willing to go the furthest and the fastest to address the urgent needs of our climate crisis. These 115 companies represent 21 different industry sectors, from financial services to automotive companies. But most relevant for today, there's about 15 companies that have signed the climate pledge that represent the real estate and construction industry, inclusive to design services, energy, and even manufacturing solutions that support buildings. And at Amazon specifically, our commitment to zero carbon through our commitment and by signing the climate pledge extends to all of our global operations, which you might realize is varied and large and complex. So to everything, not just our buildings, but our entire global network and operations. So it's been a really exciting 2 years, and we have a lot of other interest out there in the world, and excited to see how the climate pledge continues to make waves in the industry, and we continue to get more companies to sign on and join us in this movement to address climate change in the built environment.
Perfect. Thanks, Julia. And I think it's personally, I think it's already having a large impact, particularly on some of our members who are usually asking what Amazon is doing related to buildings. So having the climate pledge out there is certainly pushing some people forward in that sense. I would probably put Unico in as one of the leaders in this before the climate pledge. Definitely been part of the district since the beginning, and have been pushing stuff forward around building electrification, I think, more recently. Anita, can you talk a little bit about what Unico's approach is to carbon reduction in building operations particularly?
Yeah. So, we're a signatory to the 2030 challenge, and, our team's goal is really to be integrated within our property management and engineering groups to look for opportunities for carbon reductions. And it's really about, demonstrating the value of those opportunities. Sometimes there is a clear payback, but other times we have to show that value in different ways. And so it can be through the lens of leasing, or from an investor's perspective, and kind of building that whole picture of where value comes in from decarbonization. Electrification, as far as specific strategies, is definitely one of the things we focus on for building operations and getting fossil fuels out of our buildings. Procurement is another aspect of it. And, we've kind of talked about here in Seattle, we have a very clean grid, but we have some of our other markets that don't have that same scenario at play. And so there are some great opportunities we've been exploring on the procurement side. Alongside, Unico has a solar investment group, Unico Solar Investors, who develop renewable energy systems. And we're finding a lot of synergies with, community solar projects, for example, that Unico Solar is investing in, that our buildings can then procure energy from. And, it ties in not only from the carbon reduction standpoint, but also, allows us to control and predict our utility expenses there. So, the approach, I'd say, is very, it's a lot of times just project specific and a little bit bottom up, but also has, I think, more room to grow from kind of creating that overarching direction and commitment and furthering that.
Thanks, Anita. Reid, I guess the definition of, or we're here, I think, in this conference in general, to talk a little bit about smart buildings. Can you talk a little bit about what your definition of a smart building is? And then once you have a smart building, what are the strategies that you could use to ensure that you get the value out of that investment?
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. For McDonald Miller, smart buildings is really about getting the HVAC and mechanical systems connected. That's our area of expertise. And if you zoom out from like a macro perspective, if you look at the carbon footprint of the US, 40% is from the built environment. And then you go, hey, 80% of the built environment that we're going to be using in 2050 already exists. And then the biggest consumer within that 80% is HVAC. So when you think of buildings and carbon, and where are you going to get some really good bang for your buck of reducing carbon, but also saving money, it's with your HVAC systems. And so getting the data that's hidden behind control systems, what are you doing with your moving air, moving water, moving refrigerant, getting that data exposed and connected to buildings the owners, operators, and occupants is where we would define when a building kind of first becomes smart. We heard earlier this morning, if you've been on the conference, you got to be connected to the grid to become smart. I think there's kind of various levels of evolution for what it means to be a smart building. For us, step one is getting the mechanical system connected and exposed from a data perspective. And then, strategy, I think, Anita, you hit on a great point about procurement. That's kind of strategy number one of how do you procure a smart building strategy or a decarbonization strategy for your facilities. Is there's a lot of cool options out there to start to procure that you can structure that investment in a lot of different ways, whether that's, software as a service, service as a service, spreading that cost, that first cost, or, bundling the energy savings as an annuity and partnering with a green investor. There's a lot of ways to change your kind of procurement methods so that you can either spread your cost or move your cost so that you hit your own requirements for that return on investment. But when it comes to boots on the ground, and Julia, you talked about boots on the ground, and those are the people doing the hard work. For us, it really comes down to the difference between going out in January. If anyone did this in 2019, you went out in January and got your gym membership, and then you promptly stopped going to the gym because your New Year's resolution ended after January. Smart buildings can be that very same thing. Unfortunately, you can go invest in a smart building system and get data, but if you don't drive action with the data, you're not going to get the value of that investment in return. And McDonald Miller learned that hard lesson right along with our partners deploying smart buildings. 5-6 years ago, we'd set up that system and we go, wait, why aren't we getting that return on investment? And so we adjusted our approach and said, hey, we'll help get you the gym membership, but we'll also go to the gym for you. And that's a pretty good deal. I wish I could get that in real life. So we'll go to the gym for our clients and drive data, whether that's us changing control systems, sequences, fixing pieces of equipment in the field, or just taking that data and giving very, very crisp instructions to clients who are struggling to staff teams to support what do you do with smart buildings. So I would encourage any vendors out there, anyone looking to deploy smart buildings, to acknowledge the cost and the commitment that comes after you get the membership. You can't just abandon that. You're going to end up with a stranded asset in your smart building system if you don't take advantage of it.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the lessons we learned when we started this smart buildings process, is you have to have those regular check-ins to make sure people are actually utilizing the data. I'm going to ask a quick follow-up, just in terms of because you brought up 2019, have you seen a lot of difference of the benefits of smart buildings throughout the pandemic and kind of managing energy use throughout that time?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I think the cool part for how a lot of our clients have structured their smart building systems is they're looking at day-to-day operational data, real-time data from their systems, but they're also comparing that to at-the-meter information shared with the utility. And so being able to compare year-over-year utility information versus real-time set points and sequences allows either their facilities teams or our support teams to very quickly say, okay, we thought we changed the sequence, but it's not having the same impact. We're still running at the same consumption that we ran at in 2018 and 2019. We shouldn't be seeing those numbers in 2020. From a perspective of getting your buildings connected, there's lots of benefits, right? When you can't actually go to the building, or it's taking additional time to go to the building from a safety perspective. And so there's kind of a multitude of, you can, reduce your carbon footprint by adjusting your management of that facility, but you also can do more remotely for those facilities and support more buildings with a smaller team when you get connected to your data. So I think that's kind of a multifaceted benefit with COVID. And then I think that there might actually be a session about IAQ, but pulling in more data and looking at more data when it comes to indoor air quality is something that's really kind of breaking loose.
Perfect. Thanks, Reid. Julia, I'm going to go back to you a little bit. I think there's, or in my experience, there's a lot of different definitions that float around for what net zero is. Can you give us what kind of the Amazon Climate Pledge definition is?
Sure, absolutely. And you're right. There are a lot of different definitions out there for what a zero carbon, net zero carbon, carbon smart building is. So as I noted before, the climate pledge applies to all of our operations, including our entire global real estate. So as such, we created a company-wide definition for reaching zero carbon in our buildings, which includes a transition to all electric, removing combustion from our buildings, using low to no global warming potential refrigerants, which in some spaces of the refrigerant industry is easier to do today, and others, as we all know, it is a longer, harder road. Another part of our definition is to have highly energy efficient buildings from the get-go. We want to utilize really industry-leading energy efficient technology and be really smart about energy reduction from the start. And lastly, have a demonstrated reduction in embodied carbon. So Stacy talked about the importance of reducing the embodied carbon emissions, and we have set some goals around what that means for our real estate. But our buildings also support other key company-wide goals that help with carbon reduction and help support the climate pledge. As many folks may know, we have a goal to be powered by 100% renewable energy in our entire company by 2025. And that goal is also inclusive to Amazon devices. So our buildings are and will be by 2025, 100% powered by renewable energy. And much of our portfolio has on-site solar as well. And proud to say that we're now the largest buyer of renewable energy in the world, which is really exciting to see such progress towards this goal. And we also have goals to decarbonize our transportation system. Some of you may be aware of a goal called Shipment Zero, which just as a quick aside, we do advertise and provide details on a lot of these goals on our website and in our annual sustainability report if you want to dig in for more details. Shipment Zero commits Amazon to have 50% of all customer shipments be zero carbon by 2030. So our buildings are also supporting the fleet electrification we have underway in support of that goal. And last, but certainly not least, we also use smart building controls to optimize the operations of our buildings to help fine tune them as they get up and running and they're operating, and also provide the analytics that we need to further optimize the performance of the buildings going forward. So about 7 key criteria in our definition, a lot to tackle, but have been really excited to see the adoption in our portfolio of these goals.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, there's so many facets to it, and I get that asked a lot about the 2030 challenge and why is it called a challenge? And like, if it was easy, everyone would be doing it, right? So you have to put these
Right.
things out there for this stuff. Anita, I think Julia just kind of keyed this up a little bit of building electrification and the importance of that in order to get to some of these net zero goals. Can you, I think, well, as I mentioned before, Unico is doing a lot around this. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what your approach is to building electrification?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, it's project by project still in a lot of ways. I think we've had a lot of success with our new construction projects where we can set those goals early on and really integrate it up front to have an all electric basis of design and established. And I think in the last 5 years, all of our ground up developments have been all electric, and we even have a few repositioning projects that are planning that as well, that are not just in Seattle where it's required, but around the country. And I think that's, you know, part of it. We have to tell that story about carbon kind of holistically to be able to demonstrate that value. And I think that each project and team that we bring on, you know, getting that storytelling and kind of inspiration across to people is important. You know, we have one repositioning project in Portland where we are wanting to make the transition away from, you know, replacing a natural gas boiler to an electric heat pump, right? And when you compare the EUI of these two projects, it's actually really similar. But when you compare, you know, the carbon story around it, there's a significant reduction. And being able to kind of put that real value into perspective for our investors, for potential tenants and so forth, is part of, I think, the approach that we need to take, because we've got companies that are making really great goals and opportunities, and then there's folks that don't know how to think about this yet. And I think being able to communicate that and inspire people through those stories is a really important part of the approach.
Yeah, completely agree. Thanks. And then Stacy, Julia just mentioned embodied carbon. There's probably some people on the session that are thinking like, that's great, but if only there was like a tool that I could use to account for that. Do you have anything like that?
It was such a softball, Matthew. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I think the work that Building Transparency is doing now with EC3. So EC3 is a free open access tool that you can go to buildingtransparency.org to register for free and access. And recently I've heard it be called the Google of embodied carbon data for building materials, which is exciting. So that is really what it's trying to do is it takes verified environmental product declarations for building materials, digitizes them into a database where anyone can search and sort to find the lowest carbon options per material category, and then do an upfront carbon estimate, which is basically taking the carbon intensity per unit, just like a cost per unit would do to estimate the carbon for your building. And please, if anyone wants to learn more about that, please just reach out to me via LinkedIn or Building Transparency's website.
Perfect. Thanks, Stacy. Can you, I don't know if I think you're able to do this, but if you could put the link in the chat.
Sure, I'll do that right now.
Yeah. Reid, we've chatted kind of a little bit about smart buildings. I think just from a Northwest perspective, what are you seeing from building owners' reactions in regards to smart buildings being more exciting from like an energy optimization point of view, or from making more comfortable, healthy spaces for their occupants? Or is it a little bit of both?
It's definitely a little bit of both, but for the last 4+ years, it's been the journey really has been energy has turned out to be a happy byproduct of people's buying signals towards actually pursuing super comfortable spaces and reducing risk of downtime or loss of like a critical space, whether that's the CEO's office, an important conference room where sales is bringing in customers, or your data closet. We at McDonnell Miller and we really had those conversations from an energy first perspective of, hey, let's help these buildings work better. Let's help save energy and reduce the carbon footprint. And that didn't actually move the needle very much in the marketplace for a long time. And when we switched the conversation to how do you reduce the amount of comfort calls you get from your clients or your tenants for operators, how do you reduce downtime of people actually leaving and make sure people are efficient when they're in their spaces, that had a much stronger kind of resonance in the market. And it was cool to see, because energy still gets to be a happy byproduct if you can get that data exposed and get connected. You can drive optimization strategies. Julie is talking about using smart buildings to drive optimization strategies. You can do that, but if you lead with comfort, that finds in the Northwest to have a better connection, whether that's low energy costs within the Northwest. You see a much different scale of cost in Hawaii and things like that. And so people are going to have different procurement preferences there. I would probably close with, in 2021, we are seeing a shift from people procuring just off of comfort to people buying with signals based off of energy, and whether that's companies that are signing the Climate Pledge or the Clean Buildings Initiative that Washington State has rolled out. That's definitely having an impact on how people are perceiving what they need to put into their buildings and how they need to operate them. And I don't really perceive that trajectory changing with more policy rolling from the state or federal or local levels for that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. There's definitely more happening on the legislative side that is going to be pushing more building efficiency in the future. And smart buildings is a great way to kind of keep track of where you are and what your goals are and how you're getting to them for sure. Reid, I'm going to stick with you a little bit, I think, because there's another part of smart buildings that is just coming online, and that's the systems automation and kind of artificial intelligence that I think are really exciting concepts that I think we're starting to hear a little bit more about in the market. Are you starting to see some of those potential capabilities, and are they being implemented around the marketplace now?
I think the capabilities are starting to hit for the ideation of using and actually getting to play with tools. The implementation would be a super low market penetration. I think tomorrow BrainBox will be presenting. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they're doing on a control side and leveraging ML models. But that's still a really small segment of the market. What we are seeing that is cool in the ML and AI market is low code solutions coming out from people like Amazon and Azure, Microsoft, for people, whether that's McDonnell Miller or analytics platforms, companies like Iconics or Willow or Coppertree, to be able to use those tool sets to accelerate the solution to market. And so that's really exciting to see. I'm really looking forward to those things being a little bit more palatable and easier to implement. So that'll be really fun. I would say, if you're an owner, operator, or a tenant that, depending on how your lease is structured, you're owning the building data, there's no reason to wait. AI may not be here today, but there's no reason to wait in getting your data clean, structured, and accessible. That part's super important, and that's going to make you ready to take advantage of those solutions. And I have a motion sensor light that keeps turning off. But yeah, I think, Matthew, that's what I would say about systems automation and AI currently from my perspective.
Thanks. And a real-time look into how smart buildings and motion sensors work there.
Yeah.
Stacy, I think we've touched upon this a little bit, but building transparency and EC3 in general has a growing list of partners that are in the ownership and the development group that are engaging in embodied carbon reduction now. Can you talk about the trajectory that you've seen in the building owner development space when it comes to embodied carbon accounting and just the adoption of the EC3 tool as well?
Sure, yeah. So the tool really was conceived by myself and a software development company when I was at Skanska, actually trying to meet the commercial development group's goals. And this was probably 5+ years ago when Skanska commercial development was just trying to figure out what embodied carbon was and how much of the footprint it was. When we came up with the idea for the tool to really be able to build in this way for owners to estimate the carbon and then reduce it during specs and procurement, we reached out to Microsoft on their campus modernization project. They jumped on board to pilot the tool and seed fund it. It was then turned over to the Carbon Leadership Forum with over 50 industry partners that engaged at that time. And that was across the kind of architecture, engineering, construction, and owner sector, as well as manufacturers. And now we have key pilot partners, including Microsoft continuing to partner and pilot across their portfolio. Amazon's a pilot partner, I'm proud to say, with Julia's engagement. And then we also have a growing group of owners that we're supporting through an Owners Carbon Action Network group, which is probably one of the most exciting things that's happening right now. There's over 20 owners that are a part of that group meeting biweekly, wanting to align around how to look at embodied carbon, how to use tools, including EC3, and then actually publish draft template contract basis of design, RFP, spec language that anyone can access on our website. And these owners are standing behind as an example of how they're all going to approach it. So that's all happened in the past 18 months. We're at over 15,000 users of the tool. Over 2,000 buildings have been implemented in the tool. And I think last week we had people from over 30 countries log in. So it's the curve I don't want to flatten. It's been, we assumed we'd have about 2,000 users when we launched, just based on the market and where it was. But I think it's the one thing in my time in green building where it seems like everyone's trying to align and harmonize at the beginning, instead of doing everything differently and then coming back to try to align all those different methods. And I will give thumbs up to all the owners that are really wanting to dig into this. And if you are an owner and are interested in that group, it's a Chatham House Rules group that just gets together and talks about how they're approaching things and helps inform the free tools and templates that we put out.
Yeah, I remember, I think, talking to you probably about 5-6 years ago when it was like, hey, do you know any developers that might be interested in just testing this tool out and seeing if it works? So it's insane to see the growth of it, and definitely
that only could have been 3 years ago, because that's when we came up with the idea. So it's only been 3 years since that started, Matt. So
I don't really track time that well anymore, I'm not gonna lie. It could have been
It's been a
2
couple
weeks
years
ago. Yeah, could have been a decade ago. I don't know. Time all blurs into one these days.
I agree.
Anita, I think everyone likes to hear about the success stories of building electrification, but I think we all know that there are definitely challenges that come along with that. Can you talk about some of the challenges, and then just to finish it on a positive note, talk about some of the success stories as well?
Sure. I mean, yeah, I'm sort of closer to the boots on the ground side of things a lot of times. And so, just it takes time to build the case for these choices sometimes. And one of the big challenges is just sometimes timing doesn't work out well, right? Something breaks and you have to replace it, and there just isn't the budget and so forth to be able to accommodate what you need to do to electrify your building. I think another challenge that we are sometimes coming up against is really around, in creating that business case and kind of finding programs to utilize, whether they're incentive programs or so forth, that kind of focus on being fuel agnostic and don't really factor in that true cost of carbon. And I think, it's been great to be able to have conversations with those groups and kind of think alongside them to help shape those programs to fit what we're trying to achieve, which is carbon reductions versus just energy efficiency. And I think that working with different groups we've seen progress in that area, but it can still be a challenge in that it's not baked in the same way. But success stories, I think when we're able to really make it happen and be able to tell that story, to me, that's a big success. And, I think the project I mentioned earlier in Portland, it's right near Forest Park. So there's sort of this great storytelling piece there that we can sort of pinpoint, hey, this is the carbon reduction save. That's what that looks like in terms of trees in this neighboring community. And, I think that's attracting like-minded tenants and partners in that building. And to me, that's really a big success story there is being able to share that, the progress that we're making together.
Yeah, I think that's such an important piece of this. I think it's part of what the 2030 district tries to do, right, is share those success stories so everyone knows that this is actually being done and it's possible to do. So we're not so insulated and scared of what the future might hold in that sense. Julia, I think we've kind of given a great overview of the climate pledge and kind of everything that is involved in that. Can you talk about where Amazon is today and where you are heading with the goals throughout the kind of the whole building network for Amazon?
For the whole building network, it's hard to answer that. I wish I had
network, right?
Yeah, it's just a couple buildings here and there. I don't have a nice, neat, firm metric to share on our progress. We're furiously trying to reduce carbon and in some ways building our tracking mechanisms as we go. But I can say that there are efforts and initiatives underway in all of our portfolio across the globe against the definition I mentioned earlier. Might be obvious, but could be worth mentioning that we operate in 4 major market verticals. So that's retail, including grocery, commercial office, warehouse and distribution, and data centers. And each of those building portfolio types is taking right-sized goals and steps to decarbonize for their own hotspots and opportunities. So as an example, our high refrigerant consuming buildings that don't have much embodied carbon are prioritizing refrigerant reductions and shifts, and vice versa. Our buildings that don't use a lot of refrigerants but are large contributors to embodied carbon emissions are rightly focusing on that first. So I've been really excited to see the progress to date in such a short amount of time. And hopefully I can better answer that question with data in the future, as we're keen to share with the industry, as you mentioned earlier, sharing those lessons learned to keep going faster and doing more. And for where we're headed, I'd say, at a macro level, we're headed to have net zero carbon buildings around the world. That's every building type, every country we operate, and we have some exciting milestones and projects coming up that I can't let the cat out of the bag for, but please stay tuned. And as you can probably imagine, that macro goal trickles down to a micro level across the portfolio. So there's probably too much to mention here. But it is worth mentioning, we also have other focus areas to our sustainable buildings program outside of carbon. We're addressing other critical resources such as water and waste, and working to create productive, healthy buildings for all people and for the communities where we operate. So there's a lot going on and a lot of territory for us to cover as far as where we're headed. But I think most importantly, aside from all of our own goals and initiatives, I want to be honest that we can't do it alone, and we're not trying to. We want all of our architecture, engineering, construction, development partners to participate with us, to push us, to bring us the good innovation and ideas they have, to work with us and collaborate, and work with us to leverage our size and scale to make change. And admittedly, we maybe haven't been as good at this to date, but we do also want to give back. We want to share our lessons learned, successes, hurdles, and be more transparent on our efforts. So it's still early-ish days, so please give us some time. But as I mentioned earlier, the climate pledge isn't ours. It's for the industry and for all of the signatories and everybody else, and we can't go alone. So personally, I'm looking forward to a shared future where all of our joint collective effort makes carbon smart buildings the new business as usual in the industry.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think that sounds so similar to the Seattle 2030 district and the kind of goal that we had when we first started of sharing information and just providing that safe space to share that amongst owners and show that what's possible and how to get there. So thank you for all of that. Before I go to kind of audience questions and some others that I might have up my sleeve, I'm going to end on kind of what I hope is a positive note. I'm going to ask you all why you're all hopeful, and kind of what helps you get up in the morning. I'll start with Anita. We'll go alphabetically.
I mean, literally and figuratively, my kids, right? Like there's this future element of wanting to make the world safe for them, and then they also just wake me up before they wake up before I do. And so I'm hopeful because kind of what Julia just described. I mean, there are companies making such bold commitments. I think there is this desire to be transparent, accountable to one another, to help one another. And I think that is a reason to wake up every day and keep at this work, because I think of the work that, everyone here in this panel is trying to do collectively. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Thanks, Anita. Julia, how about you?
Sure. I think what makes me hopeful is, with the climate pledge and the over 100 public signatories, and whether or not a company is a signatory or not, there's seems to be a lot of broad collective movement today, more than I have seen before in my career working on sustainability in the built environment. There seems to be a lot of momentum of public, private sector, industry, of a lot of people and movers and shakers leaning in and asking for change and asking for some pretty big change. That's going to require some wholesale industry shifts. And that gets me really excited and hopeful, just to see such broad global collective scale of this movement. So I could be naive, but that's sort of the space I'm operating in right now. It seems much larger than it has been, and a lot of willingness from lots of parties to really drive this forward.
I think you have to be naive / optimistic to work in this field. Otherwise, we'd all drink ourselves to the grave, or I don't know. That's how I'm definitely on the more optimistic side, and getting more optimistic because of the reasons that you said, Julia. There just seems to be a lot of momentum happening now. I think the challenge is just ramping that momentum up rather than just kind of keeping it going. Reid, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, Anita and Julia have hit on all the right points, right? The world's not a gift from our parents on loan from children. That's, a quote that's been credited to lots of different people, but that one always resonates with me. You guys hit the big picture. Maybe I do something more specific. Microsoft recently has done a lot of great work going and reaching into the academic world and saying, hey, what does data structure look like for smart cities? What does data structure look like for smart buildings? And made that public resources, ties into things that Stacy's doing. There's lots of very cool public resources and sharing. Julia's talking about lessons learned. I think that collective attitude is really sweet. And then for us as, local Seattle contractor in the Northwest, it's cool to see companies like Amazon and Microsoft from Seattle as well, taking those steps and being right alongside them.
Yeah, thanks, Reid. And Stacy, last but not least.
I think I'll say, check everyone else's box of what you said, because I agree with all of that. My son has experienced smoke-filled summers for half of his life when I had never experienced them as a child. So there's things that we need to do to make sure that we're leaving them a place that doesn't become their normal forever, hopefully, based on the new reports. But I think I'll give 2 examples of why, or maybe checkpoints of the hopefulness you're hearing. So I have an alert on LinkedIn for sustainability jobs. I have been in the sustainability field since I graduated, where I couldn't find any job with sustainability in the title. Now I get an alert for 30 plus jobs a day being posted to LinkedIn in this space. And there's articles that have been written about, there's actually a shortage of folks that have the knowledge and the expertise to fill all the jobs that are coming to market as companies try to scale up their environmental and sustainability groups to meet these goals that we have to meet. And then also there's just a ton of investment, whether it's private sector investment, whether it's Robert Downey Jr. starting a footprint coalition and putting money towards carbon reduction innovation. It's kind of all over the place, and that is not going to slow down in the near future. So we might now be the bright, shiny object, but it's a good reason, because we hope to solve this problem urgently.
Yeah, I would say if you don't follow Stacy on LinkedIn as well, she has some great posts of positive posts per day that are always brighten my day when I look at them. And then might not be a bright shiny object, but if Iron Man is interested in carbon and footprints, that's pretty awesome. And then I think the other one that I touch on, which I think is becoming a bigger thing for us as the district trying to figure out, is how to get in front of schools and kids more often. There's so much drive from them to make an impact, but making the connection between kind of just general jobs in the built environment and how that impacts sustainability is going to be a key thing for the future, particularly if we have all of these jobs coming up and there's a shortage of people that can do them. All right, we have a few questions from the audience here. I'm going to start with one that I think is probably better for you, Anita, maybe a little bit of Stacy, and maybe a little bit of Julia. I'm going to kind of adapt it a little bit. So I think existing buildings is going to be kind of part of our huge challenge in getting to some of these goals. And part of that is really like the building envelope and how we attack that, because it's just has such a long return on investment and payback period. So do you have any kind of ideas on how we improve that and look at that to get rid of fossil fuels and kind of improve efficiency of buildings?
Yeah, I think part of what I'm seeing in this question, right, is with these long paybacks, how do you make the business case? And I think part of that is shifting the conversation into how do you bring value forward, right? I think that if they're showing value is one way in sort of reduced operating costs, but improving the building envelope, you're going to probably have a more comfortable space. You're going to have other possibilities and value that translate in the building's operating that is important to kind of factor in. So that's certainly the way that we try to think about it. I think another aspect to that question is just looking for every type of resource that's available to help make that business case. So there's some great incentive programs. I think there's a lot of great groups in this region that are specifically doing things like providing incentive dollars for adding window inserts. And so I think making sure that you've utilized all of those pieces of the toolkit is part of how you get it done.
Can I add something in, Matthew, just with a little bit different spin? So I was having a conversation with the CEO of a pretty large real estate owner operator recently, and we were talking about, they're looking at, do we keep on managing existing buildings? Do we go into the new construction space? And there was a stat that we have enough empty existing office space right now to meet the needs of all new construction planned in the commercial sector for the next X number of years. And so part of the thinking could be, if we invested the same amount that we would invest in a new build into the envelope of an existing, the kind of repositioning of an existing building, we would be able to do a lot when it comes to the envelope efficiency and the energy reductions, as well as the reduction in embodied carbon. So that's just something that has been in my brain over the past couple of weeks since that conversation. But if we start valuing existing buildings and investing as much as we would in them without tearing them down and starting over, there would be an investment potential in that envelope. That's the key component, and a huge embodied carbon reduction based on not, reconstructing the concrete and steel. So I'm just putting that out there. It's been on my mind.
Yeah, that's a crazy stat. Do you have anything to add, Julia?
Yeah, I can tag on to that. I think what's interesting about the question is, the current low cost of gas. We're committed to removing combustion. So even if gas is cheaper, we have to look really hard and do analysis on these situations each time to understand what's the real value in going against our own goals. And maybe this is helpful or not, because we are Amazon, but we are willing to engage in negative NPV projects if the carbon return and the value that Anita mentioned, such as human comfort, is there. And I think those indirect benefits, when they do show value in return as part of a total cost of ownership model, are really important to look at, because we do need to be committed to our goals and be really clear on the decisions that we're making each time in these types of situations, and really recognizing what is that value, what is that total cost of ownership telling us that's the true value of this type of investment that might be traditional or against the grain.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm going to do a couple of plugs for like incentives if you are looking at doing some upgrades, because we're talking about just kind of the building envelope. Seattle City Light has some new great incentives. So their pay for performance program is kind of specifically calls out the envelope as one of their measures to improve your building. And then energy efficiency as a service is their pilot program, which will help. King County is looking at announcing their C-PACER program, I think the end of next week, which is commercial property assessed clean energy and resiliency that will give you access to some pretty low financing options for improvements. And then as a selfish plug, if you have an existing building that you're looking at doing a major retrofit, the 2030 Challenge pilot program is available for you. That would give you a density bonus if you undergo a major renovation and hit the 2030 goals. Kind of multiple good options for people now if you're looking at doing major upgrades for your buildings. So the next question we have here is curious to hear about how panelists envision the role of smart buildings in decarbonizing the grid, and whether building owners or managers see things like grid interactive buildings as an opportunity for or a risk to asset value.
I'm happy to jump in here first, just real quick.
Yeah, perfect.
I see the risk of not doing is you're going to end up with a stranded asset. So if you're not connected with the grid and your building's not working to share energy back and forth or consume energy at the right times, there's probably some risk out there that you're not going to be compliant with some regulation or policy coming down the pipe. And then in that case, it's going to be harder to move that asset, reposition it, do whatever you would like to as an owner and operator. So when I think of preserving that asset and making sure it's easy to transition in its phase of life, whether you're selling it, repositioning it, or continuing to own it, I think I see it as a huge opportunity, not a detractor, but super interested what the rest of the panelists think.
I can jump in. I think it's a great question. We are working on a bit of some adjacencies to this. So grid interactive buildings, I think we would see definitely as an opportunity. It does get very complicated. We have a really large renewable energy team that spans across all of our real estate types and works really closely with AWS and their renewable energy and their smart building systems. I'm not on that team, so I don't have all the perfect answers to this question, but decarbonizing the grid is really behind our renewable energy commitment and is something that we're working on. And if the person asking that question would like to talk more about it, and from an Amazon perspective, I'm happy to follow up afterwards and point you to the people who can give you a better answer.
Anita, do you have anything you'd like to add, or are you good?
I was just going to agree and echo in terms of seeing it as an opportunity. And I think, of course, again, there's some case-by-case scenarios to explore, but I would certainly, I would just sort of voice that support as an opportunity.
Perfect. We don't have long left, Anita, but we're getting some like random feedback from your mic.
Oh,
Not
sorry.
sure what that is.
I'll try to figure it out.
I think we can probably deal with it for like another 15 minutes if it's not an easy fix. I kind of touched on the incentives one already. I'll ask this one because I think it's kind of interesting that most companies are not as big or don't have as many resources of like the Amazon, Skanskas, and even like the Unicos of the world. How do you think we can scale some of these success stories down to the smaller building owners so that it's affordable and kind of reaches 100% of buildings? I think, Reid, you're probably a good person to answer this question.
Yeah, my first job at MAC was how do we get some smart buildings into small buildings? And I think the cool part that we're seeing is a shift when it comes to control systems and how they get deployed in smaller real estate pieces of property. And with the advent of wireless communication and lower broadband solutions, you can deploy some connected devices at a much cheaper cost. And the opportunity to just hit simple things from a building control perspective, schedules, set points, nightly setbacks, things of that nature. That's a huge improvement on energy consumption. And when you think of reducing your risk of carbon or the carbon footprint of your facility, I think that's a great place to start. Not the silver bullet by any means, but a great place to start.
I can add on to that. I love this question and I love the challenge. I think we all need to productize our learnings and make sure that if we're out in front talking to industry partners and making asks, that we ensure any ask on behalf of our larger companies and any scaling is also considered in scaling down for everybody else. One of our tenets is to change the industry. So I hope we can be a valued partner in that effort, or question, or I might even kind of take this as an ask. I think we all need to be cognizant that there's lots of different building types and sizes and budgets and realities out there. So if we do have that advantage to drive that change, we need to make sure we're also asking for it on behalf of everybody else. So it's not a perfect answer. I do love the question and really want to take that challenge back to our own work. But maybe one more tactical example. We have a BMS and analytics platform that we use, and we are trying to scale it across our portfolio. But even in our portfolio, it's 2 Cadillac in some cases, or I should say 2 Tesla. We need the Volt for some of our smaller buildings and for some of our businesses that don't have the equivalent funds to use Tesla. And so it's even something that we're working on inside our portfolio. But again, I think if we can kind of package that learning or package maybe how we did that and carry that forward to the industry. Hopefully we can help scale down some of those success stories to make them more available to the 80 to 100% of the other buildings as noted in the question.
I just want to give an example. You know, with EC3, it started as an initiative to solve a problem for Skanska. And I think it's an example of a company saying, okay, we can't just solve this for ourselves, but we need to solve this and provide something that everyone can use to do something actionable. So I think, you know, EC3 to me is an example of a free open tool that's trying to make something really complicated as easily accessible to really anybody without a cost to use. And the more we can democratize some of those kind of low barrier to entry tools, and then also definitely democratize the data to make it easily accessible and useful, we're getting somewhere. I think that can apply to not just embodied carbon, but you know, the tools and the ways that we're approaching operational carbon as well.
Anita, you add anything? Oh, now your mic is not working at all.
Oh,
Oh, came back then.
is it working now?
It is.
Okay.
Okay. It's kind of like spotty on and off. I think the only thing that I would add to this is like a lot of these solutions have come down in price so much over the last, 7 years. When we first started doing this as a smart buildings platform, we were giving like a crazy incentive to get people on board with it. And now it's much more readily available for any owner, and that kind of the different level of smart, I think, is something that you will probably hear a lot about in this conference. In that sense, and I think the other side of it is like the incentives are available now to most people for this stuff, and smart buildings is starting to become something that is incentivized by utilities. And then the last thing I'll add, I think it's kind of a shameless plug a little bit, is there are organizations like the Seattle 2030 District that are trying to do this, right? Where we have all of the large building owners as members, but we're not, or we're trying to take all of that information and share it out to other small building owners who don't have the time to look at this stuff. And how do you guide them to the programs and incentives that big building owners are using? So there's a lot of great resources out there in the nonprofit world and the community stakeholders. So definitely kind of take a look. And if you're interested, kind of look me up on LinkedIn and I'll connect you to whoever you want to be connected to in that sense. I think this is a pretty good last question to finish on. I think it's also a funny one for Stacy, who's just come out with this like major innovation. But what is the next innovation or technology that is going to change the way that you currently do business?
I mean, I can start since you said my name. Just I think that I think it's going to change the way we all do business, but it's really shifting buildings and materials from carbon emitters to carbon sequesters or carbon sinks, and all of the different technologies and innovations around how even materials like concrete can sequester carbon within them and hold them in the building. So I'm just really excited about that, and there's a lot going on in that space.
Is my mic working now? Is this better?
Yeah.
Okay, great. You know what? I think I'll say that I'm really excited about these programs like City Lights Energy Efficiency as a Service program, and these opportunities to kind of think about how to solve this, you know, for us, this split incentive issue for putting energy efficiency into our buildings that, you know, tenants have the benefit from. So that's something to me that's really a game changer in how we're approaching things.
I can go next. I would agree with both Stacy and Anita. I think, you know, some of the utility programs that are coming out are really enabling, you know, whether that's the changing of procurement, you're shrinking the ROI, or just reducing that upfront cost that was maybe hard to get the capital together for in the first place. That's super cool. Maybe one that people wouldn't talk about as much, but kind of a synchronization of work order management between vendors and occupiers, operators, owners. Everyone's managing their enterprise resources, accounting, staffing, where are people, where are their tools, where is their inventory, and a lot of emails and phone calls go back and forth to get that all in line. A lot of overhead of businesses spent getting that streamlined. And as those platforms become more data friendly, just like our buildings, that synchronization between vendors and operators and owners is super exciting to me, and I think will allow us to move faster as partners.
I guess that's me. I don't think it's a single thing, unfortunately. I don't think there's a silver bullet to a lot of this, but I think from my perspective, supply chain and procurement, which Anita mentioned earlier, is really critical. I think shifts in supply chains is going to be really important because a lot of that includes some of the next technologies and innovations, whether it's carbon neutral or, as Stacy mentioned, carbon positive materials, low to no global warming potential HVAC systems. The refrigeration industry is getting there. We need the MEP and HVAC industry to catch up. Lower or zero carbon grids, electric fleets that are larger than vans. So I think it's a lot. It's all very exciting, though.
Yeah, I would echo all of those. I think it's not really like the next innovation, but it's coming. I mentioned CPacer already. I think a lot of building owners have been waiting for that to come to help finance some of these upgrades, particularly after the last 18 months of everything that has been going on. Reid mentioned it earlier. I think AI is going to have a really exciting impact on the way that some building owners run their building, and just take some stress off building engineers as well. If a computer can do it for them, it frees up some time to do other stuff. This might be a slightly unpopular one, but I'm actually kind of excited about the building performance standard that's coming from the state and how much that's going to push all building owners forward and kind of force people in a nice way to look at what their energy use is and try and make improvements. So it's an opportunity for us to go out and say, okay, this is the goal, but if you do X, Y, Z, then you can kind of cover yourself for the next 4 or 5 iterations. So it really incentivizes people to go above and beyond that, and there are multiple incentives to help you do that. So I think that's a great way to finish. Thank you to all the panelists, Anita, Reid, Stacy, and Julia, and thank you for all your questions from the audience. I think we answered every one of them. If we didn't, feel free to shoot me an email and I'll see if I can answer it myself, and if not, I'll put you in touch with the panelists. So thanks everyone, have a great day and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.